Hello, everyone. I just like to thank God for giving me this opportunity to tell my story. We lived in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where my mother and father worked overnight shifts. One night, when I was 8 years old, for the first 3 years, it was pretty okay. But when my mom and dad started having big time problems, like they used to fight like cats and dogs, my father started drinking and doing drugs. He started the whole family. So one night he came home at the age of 8 and he asked me to come downstairs and make him some eggs. I said, okay. When I got through making the eggs, he asked me to sit next to him. So I'm okay, no problem, I'll sit next to you. So after I sat next to him, he ate his eggs and he told me, why don't you lie next to me? And we were lying together on a sofa and watch some TV for a little while. I'm like, okay. After that, he asked me to touch his private parts. And I said, no. I started crying. No, I'm not going to touch you. At that time, my age was 8 years old, and I had 4 brothers and a sister living there also. We lived in a 2-story apartment, a 2-story house, and my mom and father owned it. So he just started to beat me. He beat me with a belt and just said, you're going to do what I asked you to do, or I'm not going to continue to beat you. And I'm like, I'm not going to do it. Keep in mind, my siblings of four brothers and a sister was upstairs hearing me crying. He got tired of beating me with this belt and told me to go to bed. The next night, he called me back downstairs to make him some eggs again. And I was in the bed saying no, and he told me to get up or he's going to kill everybody. He was whispering this to me. So, okay, I went downstairs at the age of 8 again and started making the eggs, and he told me, I don't want no eggs. And on the table laid a knife of like 9 inches long and a belt with a buckle as big as like 4 inches long, and also that jar of Vaseline. He asked me again to sit on the sofa, and I said no. So he dragged me to the sofa and started just beating me with this belt buckle on my back, on my legs, and telling me, if you don't do what I say I ask you to do, I'm going to everybody in this house. And he still continued to beat me, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to do it. So this is when he laid me down at the age of 8 on the sofa and put a knife to my neck, and told me if I don't do it, he's going to kill me and he's going to go upstairs and kill all my brothers and my sister. So at that time, I gave in at the age of 8, and he had me kiss him in the mouth, and I wouldn't open my mouth, so he slapped me, and he had the knife to my neck at this whole time. So I kissed him. Then he told me to go down to his private parts and touch it until he tells me to stop. And again, he still had the knife to my neck the whole time, and I'm crying, and so I did that. Then he asked me to lay down on the sofa, and I started crying again. So he started beating me again with the belt on a buckle on my back, on my side, just started beating me until I couldn't take it anymore. And I just gave in to that, and he had sex with me. After he had sex with me, he told me if I ever tell anyone, he will kill everyone in the house. The next night came again. He asked me to come downstairs. And of course, he already told me if I didn't do what he asked me to do, he was going to kill everybody. And during this time, he was beating my brothers and sister, fighting with my mother. So I believe this man. Sometime we would have to run out of the house because he was so mad. He'd get a rifle and start just shooting bullets over our head. My sibling was being abused, not to the extent that I was, but he would ask, when he asked them to do anything like wash dishes, clean the house, and if they wouldn't do it, he would beat us. If we would sit at a dinner table, and at the age of 8, I did the cooking because sitting on a stool or standing on a stool, and I would do all the cooking. And if anybody wouldn't eat, he will slap you at a regular. If you laughed at the table, he will slap you. If he come in some nights and there's no dinner on the table for him, he would accuse everybody and he would beat us then. That went on for years. One night he asked me to cook the eggs, and he told me before I start cooking to take all my clothes off. He wanted to watch me cook eggs with no clothes on. And I again started crying and no, I'm not going to do it. And he grabbed the knife and put it up to my neck, and it was piercing in my neck, and said, if you don't do it, I will cut your head off and I will go kill your brothers and sisters. So again, I took my clothes off. So I'm standing there scrambling some eggs with no clothes on a little step stool because I was only 8. And after I got through cooking the eggs, he wanted me to feed the eggs to him when I had no clothes on. So I did that. After he ate his dinner, the Vaseline, the knife, and the belt was always on the table. He made me lay down in the bed with him on his chest until he went to sleep. At this age, I was 10 years old, and I had just had enough. And that same knife, I grabbed that knife, and my oldest brother saw that I had just had so much that I was really gonna just wanted to swipe his neck off, because I was just tired of being abused. I was tired of watching him fight my mother. I was tired of him watching him beat on my siblings, and I just wanted it all to end. But my oldest brother ran out and stopped me. He beat him and me both till he just could not beat us no more. And my other siblings never left the room because they was always terrified. At the age of 10, I went downstairs and it was snowing this night. And I said, "You're not going to rape me anymore. I can't let you touch me like this anymore." And he said, "Do you want me to go upstairs and cut your brother and your sister's neck and then come and kill you and then kill your mother? Do you want to be the one who's blamed for all of that?" And I said, "No." And I said, "No, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it." So he beat me. This is the worst night. He beat me so many times. And every time he would rape me and beat me and rape me and beat me, till I just couldn't take it no more. I ran out of the house at the age of 10, and we had a little basement, and I ran out of there with no clothes on, and we had a little shelter there. In this shelter was bugs, rodents, lice, and it was a bunch of dirt, and it was snowing really bad. And I laid in there, and I put on these clothes that had bugs, rats, running out of it, lice, maggots. I put these clothes on and laid on top of all this filth. And I swear to God, today I didn't feel no pain. I actually felt peace by being in there after all what was going on with me. My mom came home. I ran from underneath the basement, crying and telling her what had happened. I said, "Dad has been raping me, Mom, for 3 years, from 8 to 10, and I can't do it no more. Please help me." When I told her those words, she runs into the house and grabs the knife, and they just start fighting, and she actually almost cut his finger off. I ended up calling 911. They arrested him. I had to go to the hospital. A week later, she took him back. That's when my hell continued. When I went to the hospital, my mom told me not to say anything. She just said that someone raped me. She didn't know who it was, and that's the story she told me to go with. And because she said she could not take care of all these kids by herself, and she was going to handle it her way. When I was examined, the doctors told me that my would never be the same. I always had an enlarged. My mom wouldn't. They said I could have had surgery to close it back up, and she refused to let me have surgery. I was only 10. I couldn't make that decision. To this day, my has never been the same. So my mom took him back a week later, and that's when the rest of my hell begins. They were still mad at each other. They still fought on a regular. We ended up moving back to North Carolina. I think I was like 12 years old when we moved back to North Carolina, and they really abused me mentally and physically. She would make me go, and my mother would open my father's bedroom door and let me look at him laying on the bed and tell me he wants to go and your father. And I just ran and started crying. And she used to call me and "Why did you let your father do that?" My mom blamed me for my father wanting to have sex with me like it was my fault. So this is how my life was till the age of 17, when I ran away from home and I went to live with my grandmother, which was his mom. I just started talking to God, and he the one to help me to be the person that I am today. And I didn't have any bad reactions actually until I got in my late 40s. And then I started having bad nightmares, and I had to go and see a psychiatrist for 2 years. And thank the Lord that my job that I was on paid for me to go see this psychiatrist, or I probably would have been crazy or dead today. So I thank God for psychologists, and that really helped me. My dad, he got older. He actually had a stroke that his whole left side was damaged for the rest of his life. He couldn't use the bathroom. He couldn't feed himself. And I'm sorry. I felt no pity for that. And to me, I believe in karma. And I watched him just deteriorate so bad for, I guess, this went on with our family, I want to say, for almost 21 years. The sexual abuse stopped, but the physical, mental, verbal, it never stopped until everybody got to be adults and went and left their own lives. My father was put into a nursing home where he suffered the stroke, and I guess for, I want to say, maybe 15 years, he had no touch with the family at all. No one wanted to see him. No one came to visit him. And I guess maybe I was in my 50s, I went to a nursing home to see him, because my pastors always said, because I needed closure, because I still had dreams. I still didn't get the closure that I needed, and I had to have that to go on with my life. So I went to see him. He somewhat apologized the first time. To me, it just didn't seem genuine. Keep in mind that he had a stroke, so he couldn't really talk well, but he did tear up. I just could sit there and just look at him for a few minutes, and I had to leave. And I just sat in my car and cried like a baby. I cried like I was 7 years old again, and 8 years old when this man tortured me. And then years later, he was put back in the hospital, and he was dying. My grandmother told me that you should see him one more time before he leaves this earth, because he wants to really tell you that he's sorry. Having God in me, I went to the hospital, and when I walked into the door, his bedroom to the hospital room, he was moaning and crying, and I sat to the edge of the bed and watched him holler and scream in pain, and it was the same scream and pain that he put me through when he was raping me. It sounded just like me, and all I can say is, you deserve every pain that you're feeling. And I told him, the things you've done to me, this is your punishment. God is letting me see this. And I just cried, and he couldn't talk, but I told him, as of this day, I forgive you. And as I walked out of the hospital, I looked back, and I just saw the tears coming from his eyes. And the next day, he died. So I know God wanted me to see that. And I tried to continue on with my life, but it's been hard, and it's a struggle, but I thank God that I made it. And again, I don't look like what I've been through. Growing up with my siblings was not good for me. Even as adults, we are still not close. My siblings choose to really not be in my life till this day. Whenever I really reached out to them and tried to be in their lives, and I always try to have interventions to talk about what happened, no one never wanted to hear it. No one never wanted to talk about it. And to this day, I still say they treat me so distant because of what happened. I still don't feel the love from them at all. Only one brother came to my defense one time, and he was, till this day, the only brother that really took up for me, and he died. Well, my relationship with my mom was never good. My mother and I were very distant for 10, 15 years. I would try to talk to her. I would try to come visit her, but she would always make me feel like I was 8 years old. She never really showed me any love. To my brothers, she would be so loving to them, but to me, she was always hateful and evil to me. What happened between my mom and dad is they broke up. They broke up for 15, maybe 20 years. And when my brother Ron, who's my favorite brother, who before he died, he used to come visit my mother. And one night he bought my mom a bunch of furniture, and my father got mad at him and beat him. And my brother had just got out of the military, so he actually, just did some really bad things to him. And that's the day that my mother left him after that. His background really was not a bad background. He had two parents that loved him. His mom was a minister. Now, his father was a Rolling Stone. He cheated on my grandmother many, many, many times. So maybe that's where it started, about just cheating on different women. But as far as his growing up was not bad at all. And I can say that when I lived in Connecticut, he got my mom's sister's husband. They started hanging out with each other. And my mom's sister's husband was abusing his daughter, who he had 2 kids by, at the age of 16. So I think that my mom's sister's husband put that seed in him to start raping me. The only ramifications that he ever got into is by getting caught by the husbands of the females. Because one night when we was in Connecticut, he was at a female's house. I guess he was having sex with her. And I guess the husband came home, and actually he stabbed him near his, and literally almost cut one of his genitals off. He drove himself back home and dragged himself out of the car, and there was chunks of, and he was so bad And I actually was staring in the window, and I'm sorry, but all I wanted him to do was die. And he dragged himself in and threw himself through a glass, broke that. My mom called the ambulance and patched him up. And he went on, continued after a month later, and still being a monger that he was. How I escaped it was nothing but the grace of God. I give it all to God. I did try to commit suicide a couple of times. That was in my 20s. I just wanted to end my life, but God said no, it wasn't my time. So I just started going to church a lot. When I started dating a guy from the military, and he gave me an out, because I was so distraught, and that was like 18. I went to a bridge, and I left a note, and I told my boyfriend at the time that I didn't want to be in this world anymore. And I was on the phone with him. He told me asked me where I was at. I said I was at a bridge, and it actually was a bunch of rocks, and I was standing on there, and he talked me off the bridge because I was off the rocks, because I was going to jump off of that and end my life, because my boyfriend at the time told me he was getting out of the military and he was going to leave me there. And I didn't want him to leave me there. So my escape out of there was, he saved me. He took me out of that situation. When I think about that, it makes me tear up, because if it wasn't for him, I'd have been dead. And I know I took medicine. I took pills twice, and that didn't end my life. And when I moved to Georgia at the age of 18, I actually had a little decent life for a little while. So that's what happened, how I got out of that situation. My boyfriend, who ended up being my husband, was encouraging to me. I started going to church on a regular. I loved to sing. I started singing in choirs. Throughout my situation, I was homeless several times after I left my husband, but what kept me going was I used to talk to homeless people. I used to feed homeless people. I used to tell them a little bit what was going on with me, and it would encourage me that I encourage other people that's going through similar situations like myself. That's what kept me going. That's what got me out of that rut. And listening to the minister talk about how if you are strong and you have God in you, you can overcome anything. And it helped me by going to church and just listening to the word of God. It saved me. He saved me. And that's how my journey to end the cycle of and hurt in my heart. Life for Deborah looks like I'm waiting on a miracle right now. That's what my life is right now. I'm going through some things in my life. As again, I had to help bury my mom, so that put me in a financial bind. And so now I'm struggling so bad. I'm staying with my daughter right now. And so life is not easy, but my heart and my soul is happy and my mind is at peace. I love my kids. I love my daughter so much, and she has been my biggest supporter. So I am in a good place. I'm just in a financial situation. And if I can just get over that, I'll be 100% happy. Everything else is good. I'm just in a financial problem right now. My advice and words of wisdom is this. I don't care what you're going through. Every situation you have to talk to yourself and ask God to lead and guide you. I can just tell you, for me, having my daughter, my fiance, and my kids in my life, someone who cared about me, will help you along the way. Don't try to handle this by yourself. I learned the hard way. I waited too long, but I was a child. If someone does something to you that's not right, talk about it ASAP. Don't worry about what's going to happen, because if you trust yourself and trust God, He's going to lead and guide you anyway. He's going to protect you. So I say to people who have been raped or in any horrific situation, trust your gut and go with your first thought. If it tells you it's not right, then talk to somebody. Don't wait like I did. I thank God that it turned out like it did, but it also could have turned out way worse. But just follow your heart and your mind, and it will lead and direct you. Don't submit yourself to years of abuse like I did. I thank God that I was able to come out of it in my right mind, and I still love people, and I just want to help people. And that's my advice to anyone who's going through something bad. Tell somebody right away. And that's the best advice I can give.